Welcome to another episode of Just Pass French. Today we will be looking at two tenses, the passé composé and the imparfait, or the imperfect and perfect tense in English. So we need these tenses in order to do any kind of writing in the past. If you want to achieve even the minimum scores for your CSEC exams, you really need to try and master these tenses before the day of your exam. So I will show you an example of a climax and how these tenses are used to build that climax, and more or less to resolve the conflict in a short passage. It's not quite a story, but it will give you an idea of how easy it can be to use these tenses once you master it. But first, let us just summarize the two tenses. So the imparfait, which I think is the easier one, is used in cases where you want to see an action was done in the past continuous sense. So if you look up past continuous in English, that's the imparfait in French. So you have things like used to do, I used to eat, or I was doing something, I was reading, I was writing, I was swimming, while my brother was playing video games. Or you have an action that was being done when another action interrupted. So I was reading when my mother came home. So that I was reading, the was reading would be in the imparfait, and the mother came home will be the interrupted action. The action interrupting your reading, even if it was not literally done, it's just a concept. So then you have descriptions in the past. So if you're talking about the weather, it was beautiful, it was snowing, it was raining, that has to be the imperfect. Physical appearances and personality types. So she was very brave when she was younger, or back in high school. She was so talented. She was very tall, or I was very short. So all of these are physical appearances and personality traits. In the past, it would be translated in the imperfect, as well as age. So if you're talking about how old you were when you were in high school, or when you went to a particular country. So I was 18 when I lost my you know what, or I was 12 when I first visited England, or when I was 13 years of age, I went to Carriacou, or something like that. So anything dealing with age in the past, describing, like giving a setting or setting the scene, you would have to use imperfect tense. Narrative scenes such as once upon a time there was a little red uh, flower in a big green garden that there would be in the imperfect. You say something like, when I lived in China, I used to eat sushi. That goes back to my initial idea or my initial point that anything that was done as a habit in the past, which is similar to the past continuous, is you have to remember to use the imperfect. So I used to eat would be in the imperfect. Or I was eating sushi every day. That I was eating sushi would be in the imperfect. Then we have the passive composite. So this refers to the and is used with actions that were completed in the past, such as I ran, I ate, I sat, I jumped, he died, he cooked, she moved, he stopped, he entered. So these actions are pretty abrupt, and you should just keep a couple of them in mind so that you can tell the difference when to use them. Now, unlike the imperfect, which only has one form, we need to remember the imperfect endings and the new present tense instead of the verb to try to use imperfect. For the passive composite, you need to have the helping verb and a past participle. Don't remember these, I will link videos in the description, but you also need to go back to your notes and revise what you have been taught. Okay, so you have the helping verb edge, which is used with verbs of motion, such as the Dr. Mrs. Babington verbs, to jouer, sortir, venir, aller, mettre, descendre, entrer, tomber, mourir, partir, and so on. You should know these by heart. And the reflexive verbs. Once you see, or once you notice that you want to use a reflexive verb in the past tense, and it's a completed action, like I bathed at 5 o'clock. That bathed has two components. You have the helping verb, which should be h used, and you have the past participle, which is the ed form in English. And we'll have a look at all of those things in the passage. So the helping verb avoir is used with everything else. So if you just remember that Dr. Mrs. Babichan verbs are verbs of motion and reflexive verbs use h, then you would know automatically that all other verbs use avoir. And then we know that the past participles must agree in number and gender with the subjects if the helping verb is h. Okay, so I have a question. I would like you to respond in the in the comments. Let me know, why would the past participle agree in number and gender with the subject when the helping verb is avoir? So there is an outlier. In some instances, the helping verb is avoir and we have agreement between the past participle and the subject. That is not usually the case. The rule is that once the helping verb is h, then the past participle and the subject must agree in number and gender. Meaning, if the subject is feminine, past participle, you have to add an e. If the subject is plural, the past participle, you add an s. That should not happen if the helping verb is avoir. However, there is one reason for this, and I would like you to do your research. You should really know, and let me know in the description. I'm sorry, in the comments when that is. Okay, so let's run quickly into the passage that I really wanted to speak about before quickly summarizing these two tenses. Let's go. On y va. Ok. Ce matin, je marchais jusqu'à l'école avec ma sœur. Nous traversions la rue quand nous avons entendu la sirène d'un camion de pompiers. Ce matin, je marchais. So in blue, I have the imperfect. So this morning, je marchais. I was walking. Okay, so it's an action that would have been taking place in the past in a continuous sense. So it's almost as if I'm telling a story. It's like once upon a time there was this girl walking. This morning I was walking. Ce matin je marchais. So the verb automatically takes the imperfect sense. So je marchais jusqu'à l'école avec ma soeur. So I was walking to school with my sister. Nous traversions la rue. We crossed the street. Sorry, we were crossing the street. This is imperfect again. So we were doing something. We're in the process of doing something in the past. I'm telling a story. Nous traversions la rue. We were crossing the street. Quand nous avons entendu, when we heard. So entendre is not a reflexive verb. It is not part of the Dr. Mrs. Van der Tram verb, and so it does not have the avoir. So it does not have the H helping verb. It uses avoir. So that's why we see here nous avons entendu. We said that the passive composite deals with completed actions. In a lot of cases, when it's used with the imperfect, it interrupts the imperfect action. So what action is being interrupted? We were crossing. So this was happening. We were crossing when, boom, we heard something. So that heard must take the passé composé. Nous avons entendu. So we heard the fire truck sirens. Nous nous sommes dépêchés de traverser la rue et pendant que nous courions, je suis tombée et je me suis tordu la cheville. So the scene has been set. I was on my way to school with my sister. We were crossing when we heard the fire truck. Nous nous sommes dépêchés de traverser la rue. We hurried to cross the street. Completed action, we hurried to cross the street. It's also a reflexive verb. Se dépêcher is a root verb here. And we see nous sommes dépêchés because all reflexive verbs use être as a helping verb. And we need to have the reflexive pronoun whenever we are conjugating reflexive verbs. And like I said, se dépêcher is a reflexive verb, which means to hurry. So we hurried to cross the street. Et pendant que nous courions, and while we were running. So nous courions, we were running. So while this was happening, while that action was happening, while the running was happening, je suis tombé. I fell. Je suis tombé. I fell. Tomber is part of the Van der Tramp verb list, and therefore it uses h as the helping verb. So the je here is masculine, so we don't add anything to tomber. It's also singular, so we don't add anything to tomber. If je was referring to a female, then we had to add another e to tomber. Okay, because tomber is a past participle, and we said that whenever we conjugate h, suis comes from h. Whenever we conjugate h as a helping verb, the past participle and the subject of that phrase or that sentence must be in agreement in relation to its number, whether it's singular or plural, or its gender, masculine or feminine. So, je suis tombée et je me suis tordu la cheville. And I twisted my ankle. Je me suis tordu la cheville. I twisted my ankle. So the verb to twist here is se tordre. It's an RE verb and it's reflexive, which means we need to have the reflexive pronoun me followed by the helping verb, which is a conjugation of et. Of course, everything must be in agreement with the subject. So the subject is je. The reflexive pronoun that refers to, or that relates to je is me. And when we conjugate et, we need the verb which relates to je, which is suis for et. Okay? And tordu remains the past participle. These are things we need to learn by heart because some of them are not so obvious to guess. So make a list of those verbs you think you would need to write your letter, which was given to you this year, the letter prompt. Realize that you have an advantage. So find out what the reflexive, if there are reflexive verbs in your list, find out what the past participles are for them, for all your verbs, be it reflexive or irregular or irregular. So, je me suis tordu la cheville, I twisted my ankle. Okay, so I twisted my ankle. I do not say je m'étais tordé. No, I twisted. The action is completed in the past abruptly. So we use the passé composé. Ma sœur m'a aidé à me lever et nous avons repris le chemin. Je marche lentement car je boitais un peu. My sister helped me to get up and we got back on our route. I was walking slowly because I was limping a little. Ma sœur m'a aidé. So here we have the passé composé used. Aider is not part of the Mrs. Van der Tram verb. It is also not a reflexive verb. Therefore, we have to use avoir as the helping verb. What does that mean? If avoir is the helping verb, we have to conjugate avoir so that the verb suits the subject. Subject is third person singular, ma sœur. So therefore we have to use a. Ma sœur a aidé would have been my sister helped. So there is no agreement when the helping verb is avoir, as is the case here. There is an exception, and like I said, you should tell me in the comments when we have that exception. When does an avoir helping verb call for the past participle to agree with the subject. So, ma soeur m'a aidé à me lever et nous avons repris. Again, we have the passé composé. We took or we continued the route or got back on the route. Sometimes these things can be a little difficult to put in English. So, reprendre literally means to retake. So, reprendre is not part of the Mrs. Vandertramp verb list. It is also not a reflexive verb. Therefore, we have to conjugate avoir as the helping verb. So, if the subject is nous and we have to conjugate avoir, it means that we have the verb avant. Nous avons. Then we must know the past participle of reprendre, which is repris. Then finally, we have the last two verbs here in the past tense, which are je marchais and je boitais. Je marchais, I was walking slowly, and je boitais, I was limping. Okay, so it's these two cases, we're describing how someone was walking, so that is placed in the imperfect tense. It's also a description of an action done in a continuous format. I was walking. Walking is in your head. You can picture the person still walking. Okay? Je boitais. I was limping. You can still see in your mind the person limping as the story is being told. These two verbs give off a sort of narrative vibe. Okay, let's move on. Nous sommes arrivés à l'école en retard et heureusement notre professeur était compréhensif. Nous sommes arrivés à l'école en retard et heureusement notre professeur était compréhensif. We arrived to school late and fortunately our teacher was understanding. Nous sommes arrivés. So, arriver is a verb from the Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp list. Therefore, we have to use h as a helping verb, which means we must conjugate h so that it's in alignment with the subject. Our subject in this case is nous. So when we conjugate h for nous, first person plural, we have sommes. Nous sommes arrivés. Good. Now, if the helping verb is h, there must be agreement between the subject, nous, and the past participle, which in this case is arrivé. So, nous is masculine or feminine, it is unknown, so we leave it as masculine. So, there's no change regarding the gender. However, regarding the number, nous is plural. So, we have to add an s to arrivé, and that's why you see that s after the accented e. Moving down, notre professeur était compréhensif. Our teacher was understanding. So a description of how a teacher was in the past, that goes in the imperfect tense. The verb goes in the imperfect tense. Être. So being the teacher, if you put this in the present, it would be our teacher is understanding. And we would say notre professeur est. But if you say she was understanding, notre professeur était. If you were to say something like she was eating, our teacher was eating, we do not have to say était manger. We pay attention to the main verb in the sentence, which is eating or eat. So we would say notre professeur mangeait. Just wanted to point that out. It's very important. Now, guys, we have come to the end of our quick display of how these tenses are used in a short passage. I want you to revise. Go over the usage of the passé composé and the imparfait. Practice and have fun. À bientôt et au revoir.